Hello, Kerbal Miners. Last week we talked about the basics of building mining bases, and I said this week we'd talk about launching and landing those bases. Well, we're not going to do that just yet. There's two reasons for that. One, I need more time to figure out how to explain some of the concepts in that episode in a way that makes sense to other people. And two, after having a discussion with FreeTOS, I realized something. People don't normally launch 100-ton plus payloads into orbit on a regular basis. I discovered that our resident Uber player / pyrotechnics expert has only launched about an 85-ton payload, and only then a couple of times. If he doesn't do it all that often, how can I expect any of you to? So this week we're going to discuss launches in a bit more detail than I originally intended. First, we're going to talk about building a heavy lift vehicle in general, and then we're going to talk about launch profiles. For clarity's sake, a heavy lift vehicle is a launch system designed to launch the heaviest payloads into low orbit. The real-world Saturn V is probably the most well-known example. The rockets in the real world are designed to launch payloads in excess of 100 tons. Building big rockets is tough because as you get bigger, you start to run into scary mass ratio numbers. Basically, mass ratio is a quick and dirty way to describe how much of your rocket is fuel and how much of it is other stuff. On small rockets, it's not really a problem. For example, on a rocket that's around 50 tons in total, you probably will wind up with somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 to 35 tons of fuel. That gives you a mass ratio of 60 to 70% fuel to 40 to 30% payload. While that may sound wasteful, it's actually quite economical for a rocket. Now, take my heavy lift concept. A 75-ton payload takes around 350 tons of fuel to launch it. That gives you 425 tons total. That means your rocket is 17% payload and 83% fuel. Again, that might seem wasteful, but KSP is actually fairly generous. A real-world space shuttle launch was about 93% fuel and 7% payload. So taking everything I just said into account, why would you want to use a heavy launch vehicle? Well, a number of reasons. First, a heavy launch vehicle will always save you time. If you have a launch window you need to meet, or just generally don't want to waste your precious playtime with multiple launches, orbits, and then rendezvous, a heavy lift vehicle is perfect for you. Second, heavy launch vehicles can also be more economical at times. In career mode, a single launch with a vehicle equipped to fulfill multiple contracts is probably going to make you more money than multiple small launches. Third, heavy launch vehicles are also the only vehicles capable of building space stations for most players. I know some people are going to disagree with me, but space planes and shuttles are difficult to use, let alone master. Building a station using them is honestly above a lot of people's skill levels, and that includes me to some extent. A heavy launch vehicle, though, is just a big rocket, and we all know how to use those. Really, that's my fourth and final point. Heavy launch vehicles are just big rockets, meaning that we already know how to use them, we just need a bit of practice to get the extra weight just right. Now on to launch profiles. In small rockets, your launch profile isn't super important to make the thing work. True, a good launch profile is always more efficient and looks prettier, but you actually do get a lot of leeway when putting your single-seat death traps into the wild blue yonder. Heavy lift rockets are much more finicky, though. As a quick note, these tips are not exclusive to heavy lifters and can be used to improve all of your rocket launches. This is also not a perfect launch profile, but more of a guide for a good one. Launch profiles actually vary based on the size and aerodynamic properties of your rocket. To start, make sure your rocket is as aerodynamic as possible and has control surfaces. Most of the trouble areas for heavy lifters are in the first 10 kilometers where the atmosphere is the thickest. Then make sure you've applied enough Kerbal duct tape to keep your rocket from wobbling. Usually, even a small wobble will bring a heavy lifter toppling to the ground. Next, make sure the gimbal on your engines is set to 25 or less. In 1.0, Squad greatly increased the gimbal range of engines. SAS doesn't cope with this well, especially with the type of engines you'll be using for heavy lifters. Remember, your aerodynamic control surfaces are going to be doing most of the work here. Now, throttle up and launch. Heavy lifters don't rise fast at first, but eventually they take off like, well, a rocket. You don't want to start your gravity turn too early in a heavy lifter. You need to be moving at about 100 meters per second before you start turning. Typically that's around 1 kilometer. Turning too soon will result in your rocket tumbling out of the sky. Make it a gentle turn, no more than 5 degrees at first. Let your prograde vector catch up to your heading on the nav ball before turning any more. Be sure not to take it past 45 degrees until you're at around 40 kilometers up. At 40 kilometers, slowly turn towards the horizon. You will need as much horizontal speed as possible in a heavy lifter to ensure you make stable circular orbit, as they fall quicker in a gravity well than small vehicles. During this whole time, you don't want to accelerate too fast. Below 10 kilometers, it's a bad idea to go over Mach 1, which is 300 meters per second. Heavy lift rockets suffer even more from Mach effects than small rockets do, and exceeding Mach 1 will typically cause them to topple out of control. Another reason for not doing this is it's extremely wasteful on fuel. Much of your airspeed will be lost to drag at low altitude. After 10 kilometers, you can gradually accelerate until your altitude is around 30 kilometers. At this altitude, feel free to accelerate as much as you want. The atmosphere is thin enough that you don't need to worry anymore about drag bringing you back down. Following these tips should help you to have a less crash-prone rocket. Sometimes heavy lifters refuse to cooperate no matter how perfect your launch profile. Don't waste all your time with a design that won't work. Go back and redesign it. Probably add more struts first, then start working on aerodynamics. I promise it's not as hard as it might seem at first. If you absolutely can't make the thing work, which does happen from time to time, go straight up. It's incredibly wasteful to do so, but not turning at all will keep your rocket the most stable. As soon as you hit 40 kilometers, turn 90 degrees and start building horizontal speed. Performing this type of orbiting maneuver will generally require an additional 500 meters per second delta V as a rule of thumb. However, your mileage will vary depending on your craft's size and aerodynamic properties. As always, before closing, I have some notes. First, I'm going to do some self-promotion. If you follow Kerbalcast on Twitter, you've probably seen them retweeting some of my stuff where I talk about entries of Kerbal Diaries. That's a new series I've started where I'm playing a science game mode, recording everything, and then turning it into a narrative adventure. By the time you hear this, I should have 4 entries up and plan on doing at least one a week. I also post all of the gameplay footage, along with lots of other things, to my YouTube channel, The Gaming Psychologist. Also, as you're probably now aware, Biff asked me to do a grand tour in a mining vessel and report my progress to you guys. Boy, do I have some progress this week. If you follow Kerbalcast on Twitter, you've probably seen the images of mine that they retweeted about the KSS Independent and then later the KSS Infinity. The Independent had several design failures that I discovered after I had launched it and assembled it, the worst of which being the Mark III based design that I used. Its center of thrust was not properly aligned with the center of mass, and thrusting caused it to tumble wildly out of control and break apart. I also had numerous heating bug problems that you will probably hear FreeToss complain about this week as well. They were caused by FAR, and so I've had to axe them on for now. So, out of frustration, I scuttled the ship in Kerbin's atmosphere. After the glorious fireball, I went back to the drawing board and designed the KSS Infinity, a Mark II based design of the Puller Drive. As of writing, I've assembled the main ship in orbit around Kerbin, and we're just waiting for the landers to be built and sent up. Next week, I'll go into the specifics of the Infinity's design. I'm also considering a name change to the Kerbalcast Infinity. Let me know what you guys think about that idea. I've been posting screenshots and progress reports all week on my Twitter account for all of my stuff, which this week has been mostly the KSS Independent and Infinity. If you're interested in any of this and want more details than what you're going to get here, follow me at JMA4707, and feel free to add me on Steam so you can watch me play. I'm JArthur4707 there, although I'm considering a name change to the Mining Guru. Thanks for that, by the way, Biff. Now that the self-promoting is done, next week we should be back on track with mining bases. If not, for whatever reason, I've got a list with about 5 more advanced mining tutorials planned out on it. So regardless, hi-ho, hi-ho, it's back to the mines we go. Until next time, I don't have a rhyme, J. Arthur signing off.